Hey guys, it's Ben here with the Halfcore Heave on YouTube. I'm here with Colin and Arjun. Here, we haven't been here in like a month, but we got our conference finals going on right now. Got a lot to talk about, and then I'm more than excited eventually to talk about free agency, but we're not there yet. You know, I love my off seasons. If you've heard my off season stuff, but before we get into it, if you're watching right now and you have not liked or subscribed, go ahead and do so. You can just do that so simply in about 5 seconds. Tilt your phone, go ahead and do that. And if you want some merch, we have stuff other than hoodies. I know it's not the right temperature to wear that, but you can go ahead and get shirts. You can get tote bags. You can get pillows. You can get anything you can imagine. Maybe not put it on a punch dummy, but you can put it on yourself too. But with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about the biggest thing really happening in basketball. I mean, you could say Ben Simmons, but I'd say the Nets losing was the biggest controversy. And let's just talk about it. Is the Nets losing the biggest disappointment in NBA history, Colin?
I think there's a difference between a disappointment and disappointing. The Nets were very disappointing, but the players did not disappoint performance wise. There were a lot of injuries. James Harden came back early from injury, tried to play. I think he gave it his all, but he was still very clearly injured. Kevin Durant played fantastic. Really, nothing more he could have done. Kyrie Irving was injured. The my knock on them, and the reason I say they were a disappointment, is I go back to all those games that their star players missed, specifically Kyrie Irving, for no particular reason. Those games that he missed put the team at a disadvantage. They signed him to play. He didn't play, and they missed out on the one seed, probably because of that. Had they gotten the one seed, they would have gotten the Hawks, who were, in my opinion, an easier opponent than the Bucks, especially for them to match up against. So, do I put it on the players in the end? Yes, even though there was an injury. So, you also have to think about it as like you've got Kevin Durant, who, what is it, 11-time MVP,
Mm-hmm.
or sorry, 11-time All Star. For
Oh my goodness.
11-time MVP, 4-time scoring champion, 2 rings, 2 Finals MVPs. You've got Kyrie Irving, who's got a championship, and one of the best ball handlers, a great point guard. You've got James Harden, who just won MVP, 3-time scoring champion. Blake Griffin, 6-time All Star. I mean, all this talent, and you don't come through and make it past the second round. It's definitely disappointing, but I
Okay.
won't go so far to say they're full.
I'm gonna say there's probably been more disappointing. Like with context, you could say, oh, it's the injuries don't make it as disappointing. I think that's a little bit of BS because I think the disappointment of it is that there were the injuries and these guys couldn't stay healthy. I mean, they played 7 regular season games together. If that's not disappointing, I don't know what is. These three guys teaming up and you pay them big money, 40 mil plus and each, and they still don't play 10 up games together. Kyrie gets injured in the second round. Harden's playing injured. And KD's doing everything imaginable to try to win a series. And even with all those injuries, there you did miss a player who was very disappointing. That's Joe Harris. Joe Harris was awful for a guy being paid almost $20 million to shoot as bad as Ben Simmons has from 3-point land in his career in the second round. Is just awful. And I think even though Harden was injured, he still underperformed. I know he shouldn't have even been out there, but I'm still going to hold him accountable because of how talented of a player he is. But this is still, I think it's up there. I think it's got to be top 10, if not top 5 or top 3 most disappointing teams of all time. They still have time, though. That's why I won't put them as like the most disappointing. If they come back next year and don't win next year, and by the time these guys are free agents, if they leave without winning a ring, if that's the question, they are the most disappointing team in NBA history.
Absolutely. I'm 100%. I 100% agree with that on idea that if they don't win a ring in the next few years, that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be just a huge letdown because this year
Biggest
I'm
ever.
with Colin in the fact that, you have to add context that the fact that they had injuries and that they didn't get to have Dinwiddie. A lot of their roster just didn't, they couldn't play it's more disappointing when you have your entire roster, you've had time to bond, to grow as a team, and then you walk in to the second round and you lose in that second round, that's a lot more disappointing than like when you have like a staggering season where you just don't get a lot of time to
But
play together.
I have a little bit of beef with that because, I mean, people were still saying, with everybody hobbling, that the Nets were still going to steamroll over every other team in the playoffs. People were saying, oh, they could make it to the finals without Kyrie at all or without Harden at all if they just have two of them. And that's why I have a little bit of beef with that, because that team was still disappointing with injuries. They shouldn't have lost in the second round.
And I want to point out one more thing. That coaching, you've got Steve Nash, who's supposed to be, I mean, he was hired to win him a championship. He's got to work out kind of their, well, pretty much manage personalities, half of it. And then you've got to coach the team. And it's pretty easy to look good as a coach against the Boston Celtics this season. I say that as a Celtics fan because, I mean, they've made every coach in the league look good this year. But you've also got Mike D'Antoni, who's one of the most innovative offensive coaches literally ever. And, I mean, we don't give him credit for what he did in Houston because he didn't win a championship and all. But the way he built that offense around Harden there and going up to Brooklyn, attempting to do the same thing. But those coaches just fell through and couldn't get it done in the second round against a team who's not as talented as them.
But yeah. The next thing we want to talk about is our conference finals predictions. We now have 4 teams set and going against only 2 to escape and go to the NBA finals. That is Clippers Suns, which Suns won game 1. If you're watching this will be a little bit before the second game of Clippers Suns actually comes on. And then now it's Hawks versus Bucks. So conference finals predictions, go ahead and give me yours, Arjun.
All right. So I'll start out with the Bucks and the Hawks. So I think that the Bucks really have this series. They have really every advantage when it comes to like a series. I think they'll win it in 6 because I will give the Hawks some games. I'll give them 2 games because we've seen what they've done in like the past couple of rounds. They have had nights where they've shot the ball so well. There is nothing the opposing team really could have done to win the game. They have had unbelievable shooting nights because they have those guys in that team. But the problem is that you can't carry that for every game, and especially when you're going against the perimeter defense of the Milwaukee Bucks, when you have people like PJ Tucker, Giannis, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, when you have people up there right in your face, you're not going to be able to consistently have those kind of nights. So I'll have the Bucks in 6. And then in the Western Conference, I think this might be a little bit of a hot take, but I have Suns in 7. I know a lot of people would say Suns in 5, Suns in 6, Suns in 4 maybe because Kawhi is out. But I think that the Clippers are going to put up a fight. I think the Clippers are going to put up a fight against this team. They only lost by 6 against probably just a red-hot Suns team that was just shooting lights out that entire game. I think Paul George, he's been amazing this postseason. I think he can carry it to 7. That might not come true, but I have it like that.
They're not going to have Kawhi Leonard, so them bringing it to 7, if Chris Paul comes back before game 5, it's not going to happen. That's absolutely not going to happen.
Yeah, Terrence Mann basically would have to be LeBron.
I mean, unless Tyronn Lue continues to be the greatest game 3 and game 4 coach of all time, that's not going to happen. They're not feeding Terrence Mann even after the night that he dropped 40. If Terrence Mann had continued the tear into game 1 and was still getting the touches he was in game 6, then absolutely I'd say it could go to 7. I don't see it happening. So I would say Suns in 6 or 5. It could actually be a sweep. I don't see it being a sweep though. Depends on how quick Chris Paul gets back. But I think Devin Booker's proving he's that guy on that team. And when you go to the East, I have I have Bucks in 7. I think it goes 7 games. I think it's a toss-up. I think Mike Budenholzer is very, very good at losing playoff games and losing games in general. So knock on him, like guarantee him at least losing them 1 game, if not 2. And then in a third game would have to be just a Trae Young explosion, no matter how good Drew Holiday is. Trae Young's going to do what Trae Young's going to do. And their supporting cast has been very good in this playoffs. And as we saw, when you focus your defense around Trae Young, he has the passing where Kevin Huerter can have these nights. Bogey can have these nights. Gallinari can have these nights. All these guys on the Hawks can have those types of nights to beat you. And I think they'll bring it to 7. It's a toss-up, but I think I have to go with the gut and go with the Bucks.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to go with the Suns. I'm taking Suns in 6 because Kawhi's out. The Clippers don't have a center either. And, I mean, I think that's going to be a big disadvantage for them. And then the Suns have really, really good chemistry. I hate to be like Isaac on here, but it really does make a difference, as we've seen all season. And the Clippers clearly don't really have too much chemistry. I feel like they're a very disorganized team. And when I watch them, it's just they don't really play as a cohesive unit because they don't have an elite point guard. Reggie Jackson and Patrick Beverly are far from that level.
Yeah, no, Reggie Jackson in the playoffs isn't that far.
Okay,
from elite.
Reggie Jackson in the playoffs is a different level.
He's just about elite in the playoffs.
And then if I'm going over to the East, I'm going to take Bucks in 7. Mm-hmm. And when you really break this series down kind of by matchups, which I think is most important, you've got Trey, who I'd take over Holiday, obviously. Bogdanovich over Pat Connaughton. I guess Connaughton would be starting. And then
no, he's not starting because PJ Tucker.
Or I guess PJ Tucker. But I would take him over Tucker probably.
No, Middleton at the 2, Tucker at the 3.
Okay. But if and then Middleton would be better than Herter. And then let's see, Giannis obviously better than Collins, and then Capella is probably better than Lopez. I don't know. He hasn't been very good this playoffs, but still I'd take him. So you look at that, and the Hawks have 3 out of the 5 matchups there. Obviously Giannis is on a totally different level, but
the matchup, the matchups argument is just as dumb as the categories argument when you compare players. I don't like it one bit. I mean, it doesn't break down who's the better team. I think the Bucks are definitely.
I know it doesn't, but you've got to think about the options that the team has. When you look at that, you understand the Hawks have options. They've got guys like Gallo off the bench, and they may not be a super deep team, but they're a good shooting team. So I think the Bucks win in 7. But again, if these teams don't match up terribly well, but I think that they can take advantage of some of those matchups.
Yeah.
Remember the thing about that series is that I think we all saw it in Game 7. The reason why Kevin Huerter was so good was he kept. I mean, a lot of defense was played at Trae Young, but he kept getting it on Seth Curry. Seth Curry is a definition of a defensive liability.
No, Seth Curry's a fine defender. He's not a bad defender.
But he's small. There's nothing you can do as Seth Curry.
Kevin Huerter.
You can't contest a shot as Seth Curry. You can't tell me that Seth Curry isn't a defensive liability.
He's not a liability. He's a below
Seth
average.
Curry is not a defensive liability. I just did it.
What is he going to do every time Kevin Huerter shot? He couldn't.
You're saying every small guy is a defensive liability. That's not true. Yeah, Seth Curry's definitely not a defensive liability. If you actually watch the series and watch him play basketball, he's not a defensive liability. Get out of here.
He is in terms of size because Kevin Huerter constantly backs him.
We're done with that. We're not going on any further with that. We're moving on. But the next thing we want to talk about is, can the Clippers make the finals without Kawhi Leonard? Briefly been over this. I'll take this one first. I think it's possible. I think it's humanly possible that they make it, obviously. When you have Paul George on your team playing the level he is, when you have Terrence Mann who can do what he can do any given night, and you have like Reggie Jackson, your role players who can step up like that, Nick Batum, who's been terrific for them recently. I think it's possible with Chris Paul being out, but it all goes down to how long Chris Paul actually is out for, because the Suns can still win this series in 5 or 6 without Chris Paul because they don't have Kawhi Leonard. So I think when it comes down to it, is it possible? Yes. Would I bet any amount of money on it? No, not at all.
Yeah, I mean, it could definitely happen. I would give it about a 30% chance of happening. I think we underrate Ty Lue as a coach and what he's done with them after the Utah series. But if Chris Paul is not out through at least Game 3, I don't see it happening. I think the Suns are a more complete unit with Kawhi out. And the Clippers have good role players, but that's all they are. They're role players. So I just don't see the Clippers making it unless they have exceptional shooting nights and Terrence Mann continues to do what he did in Game 6.
Yeah, and I mean, Game 1 wasn't promising for that because they weren't feeding him like I hoped they would. And if they were, then maybe they win that game. But I mean, if you're a Clippers fan, I'll give you something to think about, and that's Devin Booker's not going to give you a 40-point triple-double every night. That was his first career triple-double.
And it was only a 6-point game.
Yeah. So, like, really not too much to worry about if you're a fan. But what you really need to worry about is when Chris Paul is going to be on the court, because that can decide this series just like that. Arjun, what do you think?
I definitely think that they don't really have a chance. There's always a small possibility that happens. But Chris Paul, regardless of what's going to happen, he's not going to stay out for the whole series. The NBA isn't going to let that happen. They might, but he's going to come back. He's going to come back at some point. And once Paul George has a subpar game, once that happens, because he's been on fire, once he has a game where he slows down, there's not going to be a lot the Clippers can really do. They have a lot of depth, but I mean, Paul George has been anchoring them. So they just, with Kawhi, they had two superstars who could, Kawhi, first of all, could give you, like, he's gonna be consistent. That's always been the thing for him. He's always been consistent in the playoffs, but I just don't see them winning with one guy.
I have major beef with that. Paul George will be the same player all series. He's not going to slow down for a game and be playoff P for one or two games in this series. It's just as like if last year you were saying Chris Paul's going to be good for this amount of games when he's performing that horribly. When he's performing at this high of level, he's not going to have a bad game. Like, he's not going to have an objectively slow game. And I think, especially with the weaker defensive unit guarding him, I think that he's going to have just the same series that he's been having all playoffs. So I think
you can't really guarantee that. I'm not saying that he's gonna fall back into a slump, because he's not. He's just not gonna fall back. He's proven that he's gonna be a great player, but every great player has a bad game. That's just part of the game.
Not really in the playoffs, though. No, there's
no. Even the playoffs. Trae Young had been obviously on fire, and then he had a terrible performance.
Yeah, well, he had the runner-up defensive player of the year on him in the after he had his really big game. He then had that player on him guarding him, and that's a lot different than Paul George being guarded by Cam Payne and
Yeah. I mean, let's be real. Trae Young is not. I can't tell you how tall he is, but he's not too tall. And Ben Simmons is like 6'11" or something crazy like that, guarding him, defensive player of the year, and he's still doing this. That's a totally different kind of thing.
Yeah. My point is that that's always going to happen.
Let's not get to comparing Trae Young now and Paul George now. They're not the same player. That's a different type of thing.
My point to this is the fact that he's unlike other teams, when your star player is solely hinging a team, and once they don't drop a 35, 40-point game, then it starts to collapse. That's
not really how it
does it, though, because Devin Booker did the same thing. If both of them don't perform at that same level, then we have a competitive game again. I'm not saying the Clippers are going to win.
Yeah, you can say the same thing about Devin
Booker. They have so many guys on that team. I'd much rather take.
Yeah, every team has the same number of guys.
No, but it's about skill. They have much better guys on that team. I'd rather have.
I mean, if you look at playoff numbers,
you have guys who are going to consistently give
for legitimate scoring options. Are you really saying the Clippers are that far off of the Suns? I mean, if Devin Booker,
Booker
doesn't show up, and Devin Booker, they won the game by 6, and Devin Booker had a 40-point triple-double. He had never had a triple-double in his life. And I don't think he's had a 40-point game in the playoffs so far. So he stepped up a lot in that game. By your same logic, he's not gonna do that every single game. He's gonna have a bad game. So that's gonna be
that's the point. What am I saying? That's the point.
That's not true. Like, Devin Booker's not guaranteed to slow down. He's that top tier type of guy. He's a great shooting guard. And I mean, when you're talking about guys slowing down, and you look at the Clippers supporting cast, you look at how Nick Batum's been playing, how Reggie Jackson's been playing, Terrence Mann when you need him. I mean, they have a very solid supporting cast. And without Chris Paul, the Suns, I mean, they have a very good supporting cast, but it's not something out of the water. But the next thing I want to talk about is the Bucks. They have now gone to the conference finals for the first time since they went against the Raptors, I believe, and they lost to Kawhi in 6. So, or is it 6 or 7? I can't remember.
It was 6.
But yeah, it was 6. So my question now is, with the Bucks going against the Hawks here, and then the winner of Suns Clippers, are they the new title favorites?
Yes, I think they are logically because, I mean, most people think they'll run through the Hawks. I don't think they'll run through them, but I think they'll beat them. And I think there's a lot of question marks, especially around the Clippers. The Suns, if Chris Paul's back, are going to be right at that level. And I would say if Chris Paul is back playing 100%, I'd say Suns and Bucks are. I really couldn't pick one over the other. I'd probably have to take the Bucks. So yes, the Bucks are the title favorites for me. I would not bet on it because I think it could go either Suns or Bucks.
I mean, assuming that Chris Paul will be back by the time the finals roll around and have played some games in the conference finals, it's the Suns easily for me. I mean, there's not a hole in this team when you go down the checklist that's big enough to make them not the title favorites. You look at the Bucks. I mean, Giannis, when he doesn't realize, and he doesn't realize half the time the matchup he has is going to get him a bucket, and that then costs him half of what a game he could have. And then Mike Budenholzer. Mike Budenholzer is a bottom 5 coach in today's NBA. You know what they're going against if they're going against the Suns? Literally the runner-up coach of the year, who I think should have won coach of the year because of what he did. He's an amazing coach. Then they have DeAndre Ayton anchoring the paint as the center. They have Mikal Bridges. They have Cameron Payne, who they turned from a god-awful, headed to China basketball player into a legitimate backup point guard who can show up and give you 20 any night you need him to. And then Jay Crowder. I mean, you would just have down the list a deep team: Devin Booker, Chris Paul. They have to be my title favorites, but they're definitely my favorites to come out of the East right now. And I just don't have them. I think of them as a 1B to the Suns 1A because of their flaws throughout their team. If Giannis can perform at his high level the entire playoffs or the entire series, then I would have them over the Suns. But I think it's the Suns right now.
Yeah, I think it's really go between either one. I'm going to go with the Bucks in this one because they just took out the Nets, who were pretty much the consensus out of the entire NBA when the playoffs started for the title favorites. They were definitely title favorites, and they took them out. And they also they have a very healthy team other than Dante DiVincenzo. They have, a lot of those guys are getting extra time to rest. And I think that just with the way Giannis played in this series, I do have them as the title favorites.
Well, for me, it's like, is Giannis, if he can attack the basket, I feel like Giannis forgets, I can attack the basket and either get 2 points or get 2 free throws and take 30 seconds off the clock for each free throw. But I feel like he just settles for jumpers, settles to pass out, which nothing wrong with passing out, setting up other guys. But if he just attacks the basket and asserts himself against, I don't know, who's he going up against? Jay Crowder, Dario Saric? I mean, guys like that, he can really assert himself and drop 35 a game if that becomes the final series. And I would have to take the Bucks at that point.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at Giannis, and it's really, he can't do it all. He can do it all for one series and go every single one of 4 through 7 games and perform at that high of level. But there will always be 1 or 2 games right now because of his mindset, and maybe it's the coaching. I think it's probably the coaching because I can go on for days about Mike Budenholzer. But I mean, in game 2, he had 18 points, and it wasn't even like he had a bad shooting night. He only shot 15 shots. And for him, barely shooting threes, that's nothing. So really, there will be nights where, I mean, in this series, this was the best. This is the best that Giannis is going to get in the playoffs because he was going up being guarded by Blake Griffin, James Harden, Kevin Durant, guys that are baby food to him. He averaged in every other game, he got above 33 points. So I think the further on that he goes in the playoffs, I mean, the Hawks will be a big challenge for him because of how well they can scheme against guys just like him, like they did against Randall and Embiid. But I mean, even the Suns, they have Mikal Bridges, they have Jay Crowder, they have DeAndre Ayton, all guys that can hold their own against a guy, even at a tier like Giannis is. But I think when it comes to just holes in the team and how consistently they can play at that level and how really they're playing like they've been there before, even though they have not at all, I have to pick the Suns. But the next thing we want to talk about is the Celtics Thunder trade. Going on to trades, I love it so much. But who won this trade and why? Come on, give it to me, Colin.
I was really happy about this trade. I like Kemba Walker as a person. I like him as a player in Charlotte. And I feel bad for him as to what happened in Boston because it was out of his control. However, with that being said, this was a great trade. We got rid of him. He's gone. His contract's gone. Al Horford is back. Moses Brown, 4-year, $6.2 million contract. The last 2 years are on team options. I mean, that's a steal because even if he's not good, he just sits on the bench with Luke Cornett. And then if he is, you've got a great backup center. You throw Al Horford into power forward center when Robert Williams is injured for half the games. And I think everything could work out. And then the only problem is you have to find a point guard. Is that really a problem? Marcus Smart showed this year he can be a really good point guard. He can. Yes, he can. Look at his assist numbers. Look at his defense. His shooting percentages went up. You got Peyton Pritchard off the bench. You've got Tremont Waters, who's a good passer. The thought of Tremont Waters playing an NBA game scares me a little bit.
A little bit?
However, I think that this Celtics squad looks a little bit more complete now because Kemba Walker played in like half of the games and scored 20 points in like a fourth of them. So I think it's a win-win for both teams.
I think the Celtics definitely got the upper hand. I think both teams got a huge win in this trade. If you can go down the list for hours of how great each team executed this trade, we all knew it was going to take a pick or a bad contract in return to get rid of Kemba Walker, and they gave up the 16th pick. And with the Celtics drafting history, it's just better they didn't draft someone. I mean, you look at Grant Williams was a first-round pick. Semi Ojeleye they picked on their roster. I don't care that he was a second-round pick. Romeo Langford was a lottery pick, for God's sake. I mean, they're not a good drafting team, so it's not like that first-round pick even mattered all so much. And they were going to work out E.J. Liddell, who I'm not high on. But I think the real winner of this trade, when you go to who had the bigger upper hand, was the Celtics. I mean, they created $20 million in cap room for this offseason, where if they wanted to get a real, actual good point guard, unlike Marcus Smart would be, then you could actually go get it. Like you could get a Dennis Schroeder to run your offense. You could get a Kyle
Did
Lowry.
You just say Dennis Schroeder's a real, actual good point guard?
Above Marcus Smart to be a point guard? Yes.
Oh, no, he's not.
Dennis Schroeder slander has gotten way out of hand. We're forgetting how good this guy actually was.
Dennis Schroeder's not bad. He's just not better than Marcus Smart.
To run an who's the better player? Marcus Smart. Who's better to fit to run an offense? Definitely Dennis Schroeder. This shouldn't be a debate, guys. Marcus Smart, the problem with him is he's inconsistent and thinks he's consistent at thinking.
The problem with him is he's just dumb.
Marcus Smart
will take stupid decisions.
Marcus Smart makes horrible decisions every night in. He's inconsistent, takes bad shots, and every night thinks he should be taking 20 shots on offense. So him running an offense with his lackluster playmaking skills to make people around him better, he shouldn't be running an offense. Peyton Pritchard shouldn't be running an offense. I'm sorry, he could get there one day, but that's definitely not something you should bank on. But like guys like Kyle Lowry, Dennis Schroeder, you should go try to get him with this $20 million you created in cap space. And you got a guy in Al Horford. People are saying they got too many centers on the roster. Al Horford's not a center. He can play the center and he can play it very well, but he's very naturally a 4. He stretches the floor for you. He can shoot the 3. He plays great interior defense. So when you need him to play center, he can play center, but they'll probably start him at the 4 and start Rob Williams at the 5. I don't want to hear anything about him being a center. So I think really both teams won the trade, but when it comes to the better upper hand, the Celtics created a lot for win now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think both teams had a win. I think that the Thunder, I like what the Thunder got here because they got their first round pick. Sam Presti got his first round pick. He has another one to his collection. And I mean, Kemba Walker, a lot of people are saying that like he's not gonna be a good point guard anymore. His time is over. And like my thing with that, he's regressing. He's obviously regressing. He has knee issues, but he'll give you a solid 15 points per game. I think he'll give you at the bare minimum. He'll give you that at the bare minimum. And he's not. It really doesn't matter for the Thunder because he's not fitting their timeline. They'll ship him off for a second or first round pick maybe, but. I mean, the Celtics also got their cap space, like you guys said, but Al Horford is a good player, but keep in mind this guy was in the injury report for being old. This guy is very old. At some point, really. He's going to be let. He's going to go.
By that measure, LeBron is very old.
LeBron.
Yes, he's old as well. Does that make LeBron bad?
LeBron bad.
Horford and LeBron are two very different players in terms of tiers. Horford is not going to be a big addition for this Celtics team. He'll be all right, but he's also very old. That's what we need to keep in mind. He's not LeBron. He's not at that level.
He was having an amazing year last season, and they put him on the injury reserve for being old because they
were winning too much.
Young. It wasn't that they didn't want him in the rotation because he was old. I think it was because he wasn't a young guy. They wanted to give these young guys more minutes.
And they sat him down. They were 12 and 19. They didn't want to win anymore. They wanted to get a high pick. So they sat him down because he was contributing to their success too much.
Yeah, no, I think he'll be a big addition. But I think Kemba Walker at his best could be not an all-NBA point guard, but damn near where it actually is. I think people are way overreacting to how bad his injuries to if he's actually regressing in his playing of basketball. I think we saw the same thing happen with Chris Paul, and this is a legitimate. My camera turned off. I'll switch it back to myself very, very quick here. But I think that Chris Paul went to the Thunder as a guy who his career was dead, and just about dead, and everyone's thinking he's a negative asset. So that's why the Thunder got first round picks for taking him for Russell Westbrook. That are now turning out to be the top lottery picks. And he was averaging about 15 a game, and he wasn't he quote unquote wasn't contributing to winning, and he was just regressing and old. The same thing's happening with Kemba Walker. I think he'll bounce back. I think they'll get a lot for him by the end of his career with the Thunder. And I think overall he'll be an all-star level point guard once he's traded to the contender that he will be by the end of the trade deadline.
Which will be Dallas, I think.
I hope. He would be great in Dallas.
Yeah. Let's see. So I think the next thing, who is to blame for the 76ers loss, Simmons or Doc Rivers? Arjun, take this one.
All right. So I think that both obviously had their issues during the series. Both didn't execute to where they didn't. I'm going to go with Simmons on this one because Simmons just did not play like he was supposed to. He did not play. He was not an all-star this series. And obviously there are all these people, I've seen plenty of people overreact about Ben Simmons, making jokes about him. But yeah, this guy he
deserves every one of those jokes.
Yeah, his play style, the entire series just did not cut it. I mean, there have been plenty of times in this series where Embiid was tired. Seth Curry had an amazing series. A lot of the players played really well. Tobias Harris was really good.
Know Seth Curry had an amazing series.
All these players.
Seth Curry.
All these players had terrific games except for Ben Simmons. And Ben Simmons was a guy who dropped 5 points in Game 7, the most important game of the entire series. He drops 5 points. And that is such a disappointment. The way he played was just a disappointment. Seeing him pass up a wide open dunk on Trae Young was a disappointment. The fact that there was a period of time, a full half, where the only two guys that scored were Embiid and Seth Curry. No one else scored. Simmons just did not do anything during that period of time. To me, it's the lackluster, just an inability to do anything for your team, and I'm gonna have to blame this one on Simmons.
Okay, I disagree. Wait, Colin, I'll take this real quick. I think, of course, I'm not going to sit here and say Doc Rivers contributed more to the losing than Ben Simmons did. I don't think Ben Simmons was a negative on the court, though. I think he was a positive for them. They are better with Ben Simmons on the floor, except for in late game situations, than they were without him. His playmaking benefited them. He played amazing defense on Trae Young when you really look at it. I mean, besides scoring, he had a pretty good series. And I know that is a big part of the game, and that big part of the game that he needs to be doing, and he doesn't space the floor for them very well. But Doc Rivers was a negative for them. He was a terrible coach as always, a guy who doesn't make adjustments, a guy who doesn't change things that need to be changed. Ben Simmons made himself guard Trae Young because Doc Rivers wouldn't let him do it in the first place. I think really just a guy who won't put the guys in when they need to be, like Tyrese Maxey playing way less minutes than I think he should have been playing. I think overall, Doc Rivers was just as much to blame as Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons actually, I would say, has more to blame because he could have done so much more. But that's the story of Ben Simmons. He can always do so much more and chooses not to. So it's like you expected it coming. Doc Rivers is not supposed to be the guy to lose you the series, but not making adjustments is kind of his thing also.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem to me, and I look at a lot of things basketball from a coaching perspective, and Doc Rivers, when only 2 players score in a half, and the other players aren't getting good looks, the other players aren't in the offensive scheme, that's coaching. That's completely on Doc Rivers. And then you've got Ben Simmons, as terrible, as awful as he was. That's coaching when you only take 3 shots. Doc Rivers should have been on him in timeouts going, shoot the ball. Like, you've got to be drawing up plays where Ben Simmons can get mid-range shots because he's very good at that. Getting to the basket, which I guess he did, but then he passed it out. Things like that. But Doc just didn't do it. He makes no adjustments. Like you said, he thinks things are just going to work out, but really they're just going to lose 3 games in a row like they always do with him as coach. Like, Doc is, in my opinion, one of the most overrated coaches in history, even as much as people dislike him. He's terrible. He's not good at making any in-game adjustments, changing things. He limits players' potential. Like, he's just not good.
Yeah,
he's
absolutely.
just not good at his job.
Correct. And how he got a Netflix series on coaching is so far beyond me.
But the next thing I want to talk about is still on Ben Simmons. So a little transition here, talking about, is Ben Simmons gone? Your genuine belief, is he off the roster? Is he going to be traded? Will Joel Embiid storm into that office now? But Arjun, do you think Ben Simmons is gone this offseason via trade?
As much as I think they're going to trade him, I will say that they should. I mean, my thing is that if they trade him, that's good because the entire fan base hates him. If I was his teammates, I'd hate him. But it would be better for them to work it out. It'd be much better for them as a team to work it out and not trade him, because the team, guys, the 76ers don't really need to make a trade. As a team, they don't need to get better as a team. It's Ben Simmons who needs to get better as a player. It's not about the team. It's about the player himself. My thing is that they played a whole regular season where Ben Simmons was pretty passive. He was at 12 points per game, giving you playmaking and rebounding, but he was pretty passive, and they were still winning in the regular season. They surpassed a lot of expectations. They had a great regular season. They made it to the 1st seed. I think that the problem is the player himself. If the player himself can't change, and I think this will be a reality check for him, I think that he will get a lot more confident on the court because he's seen that really what happens when he just doesn't do anything. I think this is more of a problem with the player and not the team.
Okay, no. Is Ben Simmons going to be traded? Probably not. I mean, really, it's every offseason there's a guy that's going to be traded, and he's never traded. Just like every guy that requests a trade in the NBA, it seems like 50% of the time they just end up not getting traded and leave when their contract ends. Ben Simmons probably won't be traded. I mean, Daryl Morey and Doc Rivers have already said that he's going to work on his shooting a ton this offseason. He quit the Australia team so that he could work on his shooting and skills like he does every year. Like he's going to work on it. It never ends up working. I think the only way that he can actually improve like that as a player, like you think he is for some reason, like everyone thinks every single offseason how he's going to improve. The only chance he does that is if he gets a change of scenery. That's happened for a lot of players where they go to a new place and it's just a refreshment where they have to be this new guy. They have some life-changing thing. Ben Simmons isn't going to do that in Philly because he has the protection of having Joel Embiid and Tobias Harris on his team. If he's on a team where he has to be a scorer and in a scoring role, or he just has a new change of scenery, then I think he can become that player, but he's not going to do that there. But back to the question, is he gone? No, I don't think he'll be traded. The team, like NBA execs love him. If they wanted to trade him, they could probably still get something very valuable for him, as much as we don't think he's worth that. But I think also Daryl Morey loves him. I think they love him on the team. I think that he's going to stay there for some reason. I don't agree with it, but I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, if I were them, I would wait one more season. Well, it's not going to happen, but I would attempt to get him to improve, which they have done every season, improve his shooting, which is impossible because he has anxiety. But what they need to do, I think one of three things will happen. Simmons is gone, Rivers is gone, or Embiid is gone. One of those three things will happen because I don't think those three can continue to work together because Embiid was clearly frustrated in the press conference with the passing up of the layup. Rivers was asked if he could be a starting point guard on a championship team, and he said, I don't know, which if your coach does not think you can be a starting point guard on a championship team and you are an all-star and one of the cornerstones of the franchise, this is clearly not good. But
it's definitely not good.
What they need to do is adjust their offense because clearly it always fails. So I will go into this quickly. They need to use him as a passing power forward because they can run that offense, have somebody like Tyrese Maxey at point guard, a good shooter. That way they can get more shots up. You got Seth Curry out there. You got Tobias Harris out there. Ben Simmons down low where he likes to be, where he likes to pass out layups. Sure, let him pass out layups to the shooters. And they run that offense a little bit differently, get things to Simmons and Embiid down low, just dominate the paint and then pass out to shooters. That's what they need to do. Will they do that? No.
I think Ben Simmons, the problem with the process is if they had gotten a guy that could shoot, they would have won a championship by now. If they had Terry Rozier on their roster instead of Ben Simmons, I feel like they would have already been in the conference finals. I'm like before Game 7 because they would have had that spacing. They would have had a great team. But I think when it comes to the process, it sucks because you go, okay, I'm going to draft the best guy available, and you get two of these top three guys, and Embiid goes to a superstar, Ben Simmons comes to, he was supposed to be a superstar, and then they just don't fit together. They've never fit together on the court. They've never, their talents don't mesh well together. And I think for the best for both of them and for the team, Ben Simmons has to be traded. Again, I don't think he will be traded. I think the best for his career is if he moves on. The best for Embiid's career is if he moves on. The Sixers are more likely to win if Ben Simmons moves on because he just can't. He limits so much of your offense, and he draws his offense to a negative because his playmaking's great, but he can't be a great playmaker when he actively closes down the offense with his spacing. So I think he needs to move on. Sixers need to move on, but it won't happen. Let's move on and talk about. Who is to blame for the Jazz losing to the Clippers the most? There's a lot of people to blame here, but Arjun, you go ahead and take this.
I'll keep this brief because I think that it's pretty simple. I mean, the Clippers had a terrific series, but if I were to choose one thing, I think you could choose injuries, but I think I'm going to go with the defense because I think the Jazz defense, especially Gobert, they were absolutely shredded with the fact that the Clippers not having a star center or really good center actually worked in their favor because they ran a really good system of small ball, and that really flustered Gobert because Gobert constantly had to go through screens, constantly come out to the perimeter where a lot of people where the main players would be, and he was just broken down by that defense. I mean, Gobert is a terrific player, but he's a terrific defender, but like there's only so much you can do. You can't just like during the regular season when he's matched up with when he's matched up with a good center and he's stuck in the paint, that's when he's at his best. But when you have him constantly closing out on guys, that's where the breaking point happens. The Clippers did an excellent job of utilizing ball movement. I mean, we saw them constantly passing the ball around the arc, and it just flustered that defense.
I think Rudy Gobert is always going to be easy to expose when you just get him in a pick and roll. I mean, at that point, he just melts down and dies. And that's everything that he's good for dies when he's in a pick and roll. When we really just get him caught on the perimeter with a quick guy, he's done. Everything that he's good for disappears. But I think really injuries. I mean, Mike Conley and injuries. The one injury was Mike Conley, and I think you could say, oh, well, the Clippers didn't have Kawhi for Game 5 and Game 6. They should have been winning those games. In Game 6, they had Mike Conley, so it's a little less the blame. But I mean, he makes their offense a ridiculous amount better when he's on the floor than when he isn't. And I think people really started to see that and I think teams that will want him this offseason will see that more because of this series. Mike Conley makes their offense flow a ridiculous amount more. And when he's off, and when he's not on the floor, it's basically just how many points can Donovan Mitchell score before Mike Conley gets back on the floor. And I mean, that worked for 2 games, and they won 2 of the games. But really, without Mike Conley, their offense struggles a lot. And I know Kawhi wasn't there, so they should have won that series anyways. You can blame Gobert. You can even blame Quinn Snyder. He's not as terrific as he's put out to be, as we saw in this playoff series. But I think there's a lot of things to blame. I just don't think they're that tier of team. I think they were an overrated team because they played this regular season so well by keeping their same roster together during COVID, where no other team could meet up with their new players. So they all knew each other. They all had the bond. But really, I don't think they're that tier team. But if you had to blame something, I would blame Mike Conley.
Yeah, I mean, I would blame Gobert, and I would blame I really think that the Clippers not having a center, like Arjun said, when Gobert goes onto the perimeter, it's always pretty funny. Just seeing him like run back and do this really awkward run as he's being like driven past. It's really unfortunate for him, and quite funny for us viewers. But the Clippers really exposed that because they ran an offense where there were a lot of screens, a lot of passing and cutting, kind of a motion type of offense. And when you run something like that against a team with a center, the logical thing to do is tell the center, hey, stay in the paint. Don't move. Just contest their shots in the paint. But Quinn Snyder didn't do that and had him going out to the perimeter. So I blame Quinn Snyder as much as I do Gobert, because Gobert was put in a bad position having to guard players who were not centers.
I think Quinn Snyder got exposed this offseason and this postseason. I think that people won't really realize that. People won't really acknowledge that because, I mean, Gobert is fun to laugh at and Mike Conley was injured. So there's like things to cover up how mediocre, how mid-major, and how really how bad he really was this postseason. I'm not saying he's fireable. He's not Doc Rivers level, but I mean, he really proved why he's an overrated coach to me with how he continues to not learn from Gobert in the playoffs. And it's not, Gobert doesn't want to be on the perimeter. He's a smart defender. It's not his fault, but really when he's in the game, if he's on the perimeter and he's in a pick and roll, he's done for, and he knows that, but he still kind of has to because of Quinn Snyder. But the last thing I want to talk about today is going back to the Hawks-Bucks series and talking about how realistically can the Hawks beat the Bucks and go to the finals this year, Colin?
I don't think it will happen. Can they? Yes. Will they? I don't think so, unless Mike Budenholzer is just really, really stupid, which he has proven to be. Pretty stupid.
He's pretty stupid.
So I think the thing that the Hawks do well is defend power forwards, which is one of the most difficult things to do, because you've got guys who can really stretch the floor, and the power forward position is definitely one of the most important. But with Randall, what they would do a lot of times is you'd have somebody who was on him, and then whoever was in the paint closest to him would help force him to pass out, then go right over to that other guy and kind of just clog the paint. And as soon as you can clog the paint around that power forward, get them passing out, reset your defense, that kind of thing. That's what the Hawks do so well. They do it really fast. I give credit to Nate McMillan for that. And so I think if they can do that around Giannis, obviously Giannis will still have a good series. Will he have a great series like he did against the Nets? No, because he doesn't have Blake Griffin guarding him. I think it's possible, but will it happen?
Yeah, I think really when you look at the pros of the Hawks winning this series compared to the cons, I think the pros in a way they outweigh the cons. And really, if you were going off that, I would say the Hawks would win in 6 or 7. But I mean, when you have a guy like Giannis and you have a Drew Holiday who usually is a great playoff performer, I'll get into. I have a little bit to say about this. I mean, when you go down the list. I mean, their defense against guys, I mean, they've had a guy like relatively and at some form or fashion like Giannis, where they've had Randall, they've had Embiid, and now they're going to have Giannis. And credits to Nate McMillan. I didn't think he was this good of a coach. I didn't think he was a good coach. But I mean, what they did against Randall was they forced him right, and they made him be a passer, and he's not a good passer. His numbers drastically overrated how good of a passer he actually was, and he can't beat you on the perimeter. He can't beat you on the right side. He definitely can't do any of that. So then you go on to the Philly. I mean, it wasn't really that they shut down Embiid. They did a good job on him, but it was his teammates that lost in the series. I think it'll be a lot similar to what they did against Randall. And I mean, again, he had Blake Griffin on him against the Nets, and now you're going to have Clint Capella. I mean, Cam Reddish is back. As much of a negative he is on offense, he's a great, great defensive player.
John Collins.
I mean, they have really good defense, and John Collins is turning into a two-way player. So I think
exactly. I mean, you got John Collins on him, and then you bring Capella or Reddish on him to double as soon as he gets in the paint, force him to pass out. Yeah. I mean, that's a really good scheme that honestly, like, if they run that correctly, if they have those good shooting nights like they've had, it's very doable.
I mean, yeah, I think that plus when they go up against other teams, the Bucks will be a great defensive team always. But when it comes to forcing Giannis to pass out, which they will do that, they'll clog the paint, like you said. Nate McMillan will do that, and the Bucks aren't a great perimeter shooting team. I mean, Bobby Portis is a good shooter. They haven't been playing him in the playoffs. They've been playing Thanasis instead. And I mean, Bryn Forbes is Mr. Inconsistent himself. He can't have two good games in a row. Drew Holiday's been rancid in the playoffs for some reason. He's usually an elite playoff performer. And then Chris Middleton at home is Kobe Bryant, and on the road he's Kwame Brown. You can never tell with him. So really, their shooters aren't consistent. So I think the Hawks winning this series is really much more likely than the average person expects. And the casual probably have Bucks in 5. But I think this series goes the full length. And if I was going to pick how likely is it, I would say they have about a 45% chance.
Yeah, I think it's very likely in terms of like compared to how most people think. I think maybe it's like a 35 to 40% chance that the Hawks pull it off, because I really want to see how this first game goes. I want to see how the Hawks perimeter offense, which has usually been the kryptonite for most teams. The Hawks perimeter game has been absolutely amazing. I want to see how that matches up with the perimeter defense of the Bucks, because those are two really good sides. And I mean, the Bucks have the potential, the ability to prevent that onslaught of shooting. But then again, it's also hard to prevent that. So I really think that there is a good chance for this Hawks team to really to beat this Bucks team. The biggest thing is Mike Budenholzer. I'm not as critical as him as Ben is. I'm nowhere near as critical as him as Ben is, but he will definitely, he is absolutely atrocious at making adjustments to an offense that is on fire. He cannot do that. And this Hawks team is notorious for being on fire in offense. And it's had coaches struggle. It's had Doc Rivers and other guys, other like mainly Doc Rivers, but it's had those teams struggle for how they can manage that offense. So I really want to see how the series plays out. I think there definitely is a chance that the Hawks do win. But yeah, I think it's going to be a coin flip. Actually, I would say it's probably a 47 to 50% chance they win this series. It goes either way. The more I think about it, I haven't really sat and thought about it as much as I have when we talked about it today. But I mean, they easily by 20 miles win the coaching battle. That's an understatement. And Nate McMillan isn't even an elite tier coach. He's just not Mike Budenholzer, and that's a huge advantage for them. He makes adjustments. I mean, defensive planning, you can plan a lot more against Giannis with how Mike Budenholzer uses him than you can against Trae Young. There's not much you can do to really shut down Trae Young like you can with a Mike Budenholzer, Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Showing pictures of birds.
But I think, oh my gosh, I just got that. But and the Bucks, I mean, the Hawks win the shooting, they win the depth, they win a lot of things. So I think really this is a coin flip series. You can come back. This could age horribly. This could age amazing. And I think if I had to bet money on this series, I would say $5 on both. I don't know. It's really, you get what I'm saying. I think I don't know. It's a coin flip for me. I think it's a lot closer than people will say. And if the Hawks win this series, come back, clip this, and I'm a legend. But that'll be it for us today. If you have not liked or subscribed and you're still watching, go ahead and do so. It's very quick. Join the family. And if you want some merch, it's on our website. It's in the link in the bio. Arjun has some on. I didn't even realize that. But that'll be it for us today. Go ahead and watch Suns Clippers later if you're watching this at that time. If not, watch the other playoff game that is on. But anyways, see you guys. Peace.